You think Common Ground is worth a buck? Consider leaving a tip at lptv.org. Lakeland Public Television presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. In this episode of Common Ground, we join a Kelliher woodcarver on his first run at the Hackensack Chainsaw Event.
Well, hi, I'm Ethan. I'm a chainsaw carver out of Kelliher, Minnesota. It's my second year working with chainsaw carving and wood, and I just did my first pretty big carving competition or festival, whatever you want to call it, in Hackensack, Minnesota, and decided to carve this piece, the Archangel Michael slaying the dragon. It's based on Revelations 12, and it's a bronze statue in, I believe, Venice, something I saw a few months ago and didn't have the courage to carve until I got placed in front of a crowd and given an opportunity to spend 2.5 days carving. So fortunately it turned out. This is one of the biggest pieces I've worked on. I bought a log from Big Falls from a logging company almost 2 years ago at the very end of my first summer of carving, and it was a perfect white pine log, almost 3 feet in diameter. I had my eye on it because I had gone there with a log home builder to look at some logs for his work, and I had spied it in the yard and finally made a deal. Had bought it in conjunction with a number of other logs, and they dropped it off, and I had carved almost everything except for that piece. So when I got the idea to carve this angel, I called down to the Hackensack committee and talked to the guy who was managing, Dwayne Nordine, was managing the logs that were there since they provide them for us. And I asked him to give me the dimensions of the largest log because I knew what I needed, you know, in terms of making a life-size statue. This is my first life-size statue I've ever carved. And he told me his biggest log down there was a white pine that was about 28 inches, which was considerably smaller. So I decided to bring that piece down with me, and I had a friend of mine, Nate, load it onto a trailer, and I brought it down. It's a good thing I did because someone was in the process of carving that other log as soon as I arrived, so I wouldn't even have had anything near what I needed. So we got this piece set up, and I went back to my truck to get the photographs. I had downloaded a series, actually purchased a series of photographs of this statue in Rome to use as a template, because when you're blocking out a piece, you have to graph it out. You have to be able to locate all of the key points within the log in order to make sure your first initial cuts, which by far take out the most amount of wood, don't end up hacking out a piece that you need later. It's a lot harder to add wood on and then to take it off. So the blocking is the scariest part for me. Is those first 6 cuts in the log is by far the scariest part, but it's also the most essential, because if you don't get them right, you wind up spending, you know, hours trying to get to that point where you would get to if you made the initial cuts right. So I went to my truck to get the pictures and realized I had left them on my grill on the deck at home in Kelliher. And this was the actual morning of, so I didn't even have a way to get to a computer and download them and print them up again. So I had a buddy of mine, Alex Williams, who's been a terrific friend, also an artist, a spray paint artist, who was there at the festival working, and I kind of grabbed him and told him that morning that I would need him to be my live model, and he didn't really complain much, but it was great because it ended up working out even better because it gave me a 3-dimensional visual image instead of having to reconstruct a 3-dimensional image in my mind using photographs, which are 2-dimensional. It's a lot harder to do, and then I didn't have to transpose inches into feet and figure out a ratio for my carving, which means that normally when I work with a larger piece, I use a photograph and then I'll figure out a ratio. I'm doing a 1:3 or a 1:6, so 1 inch equals 1 foot, that's a 1:12 ratio. And having Alex there gave me an exact replica of what I was going to carve, and it also enabled me to put things into perspective almost immediately, because when we started carving, I mean, you all immediately have 10 chainsaws running at once. There's no communication, you can't hear much of anything, and you wind up just having to zone everything out and get locked in on what you're doing. And so having him there, it enabled me to block out the piece quicker than I've probably ever blocked out a piece before. Lay it out, make the first initial cuts, and those first initial cuts were just right on. I mean, absolutely right on. As soon as I made, I think the first 3 cuts, I slabbed the head, the angle of the hands and the head, and then I slabbed out the stomach portion. I could see it. And then once you see it, I mean, that's the important thing, to get it. You don't really see something in a round log until you block it. And if you block it correctly, you should immediately be able to see what you're carving. And from that point on, it becomes easier and easier and easier. And it did. The first few cuts, I could see the carving that I wanted to get out of that log. And then started working on the details. And the scary thing about doing human figures is they're not covered in fur, so you can't fake muscle tone. I made this carving robed because that was still easy, but then you still have folds of the robe you have to work in. And then when you get to head and hands and arms, if you're off by even a fraction, you notice it, because we see humans every day. And the scary thing about carving a human is you can't fool someone by carving a sort of a human, but not really, because then it'll look totally unhuman. So I knew after I did the blocking, and I knew after I got my initial cuts right, that I was going to have to get the face done, because if the face wasn't going to turn out, I was going to have to give the carving up. So I kind of, the first real detail I did in the carving was the face, just to see if it would turn out, and laid it out, tried to remember. I had done a step-by-step book on faces. I'd carved a few, and I tried to remember, you know, bridges, eyebrows, you know, where the nose, and there's so many intricacies to the face, and trying to remember them all in my head and make it look masculine instead of feminine, trying to make it small, because the tendency is to make your heads too large. I got the face right away. I knew that the face was going to turn out, and when the face turned out, I knew I was going to have the carving at that point, because everything else is totally irrelevant. I mean, since I'm making the wings separately, the dragon, the sword, you know, and then the robe in and of itself, I can add as much detail to that as I wanted to. I didn't have to, you know, go nuts with, as long as you could tell the shape of the human was in there and the dimensions were right. So then it started being fun. After that, after I got the face, it was like the stress was off. You notice there's people walking around. You know, there's these little old ladies coming up to you constantly trying to give you the cake and food and drinks and coffee, and they're always wanting to make sure you're fed. And the other carvers were incredible. I've never carved with professional carvers before, and they were definitely professional carvers. The guy next to me, Joe, had boxes of every conceivable carving tool I think that had ever been invented and made. And he kept, you know, giving me tips, or he would, at the end of the day, hand a couple of little things to me that I didn't even know existed, and they were fun to use, and they were, you know, it was just laid back. It was such a relaxed atmosphere. So once I had the stress of getting the figure, the blocking, and then the face done, I could kind of take my time and start experimenting. And I really challenged myself on this piece to not settle for the generic, you know, what I normally, because I've carved 2 much smaller, much simpler angels before. I'd never carved a male figure, I'd never carved a life-size figure, and I'd certainly never carved one with all of the, I guess you would call it the folds in this, you know, the robe, you know, trying to get as much detail as possible. You know, detail scares me because, like I said, once you take something out of a hunk of wood, you cannot put it back on, at least not easily, especially not in chainsaw carving. So I just started letting my mind go, and I could see at this point, I could see what I wanted to get out of it. And I just started, forcing myself not to think about what I would do wrong and focus on only what I knew I wanted to get out of the piece. And it started coming together. I mean, really started coming together. And it was fun watching people's reaction, because I was set up in the middle of this tent with 4 carvers on my right and 5 on my left. And right in the middle of that tent, there's this big statue, and all around me there's bears and wolves and eagles, and no one knew what the heck this thing was until I made that first wing. And that's the first time I've ever pieced together or mitered in a separate piece for the carving. I knew I wanted the wings to come out instead of up and down, because I wanted as much height and breadth to the angel so that it would be as imposing a figure as possible instead of just a statue. I wanted it to be dominant. That was important for me, to have that figure turn out to look as strong and as confident as possible. And part of that was having a 9-foot wingspan. That's what I was shooting for. It turned out to be, I think, 9'1". So I carved the wing, and I actually blocked out a section of the wing so that it was square, and then I carved that exact same block, it's called like a mortise and tenon joint, into the back of the angel and slotted it in and screwed it in, and that was where I finished the first day. And then coming back the next morning, I had one more day left, and I had a lot less pressure because I essentially just had to carve another wing and carve a dragon. And so the dragon was really interesting because I'd never carved anything remotely resembling a dragon before, maybe a fish. And I had a sketch of a dragon, and I took that and I took a big log and I started just working with kind of this concept of a dragon slash snake slash fish creature, where it would have gills, but it would also have spines and spikes. It would have scales, but it would also look very serpent-like. I didn't, and the nice thing about the dragon was there was no pressure on me on laying it out, since you don't see dragons every day like you see humans. I could essentially make it whatever I wanted it to be. And there was another carver right next to me, and I knew he was spying on my work, because I knew he didn't know what I was carving, because, first of all, no one had carved an angel at that festival, and no one had certainly carved a dragon. So once I started getting the dragon out of the piece of wood, he came over a couple of times to look at it, and we talked about it a little bit. And it was nice because there was none of the pressure of, well, you're doing this and that's making my work look bad, or even the sense of superiority. There was this constant, not just camaraderie, but support for what the other carvers were doing. And it was so strange to feel that, to where you were actually being encouraged to do better and to do more. And when you did better and you did more, even if it overshadowed supposedly a small bear being carved to your left or right, those carvers would come over and praise your work. And that's unheard of in most settings where it's a competition. And even though technically there is a sort of competition there at the Hackensack Festival, that morning there was just no sense of it throughout the whole event. And so I got to talk a little bit about it, and we started, talking back and forth about what a dragon should look like, and started getting a little bit more creative. And I wound up with something far better than I had hoped for, way more detail. And then I came and finished the last wing, put some finishing touches and some burning. I still wasn't sure if I would be able to finish it. I brought polyurethane with me, but the piece was still pretty wet. And then I left late that night. I'd stayed very late to carve Saturday night because I knew I only had 3.5, 4 hours Sunday morning. When I finished the carving, the sword was the last thing I had done. I had carved the angel, the wing, the dragon, the second wing, and 5 o'clock Saturday was the ending of carving for basically that day. You're supposed to turn off your chainsaw at 5. So the sword was the last thing I did. My dad helped me, he held it down, and I carved this sort of William Wallace, Scottish, double-bladed, 5-foot sword. And I never carved a sword before, but it was really easy to do. It took me maybe 10 minutes, and it was so much fun. And when I was done, I could tell that there was a group, there was quite a crowd of people at that point standing around waiting for this piece to be finished. And I handed the sword through the mesh underneath, and this couple of little kids, maybe 9, 10-year-old kids took it. It was 3 times their size almost. But it was funny watching them because they, you know, they got so serious when they got the sword in their hand, and I could tell that there was a group of guys standing around that wanted to hold that sword, but they didn't want to look like little kids. So I put that, and as soon as I attached that, it was like the crowd realized what it was. It was a battle scene. It was this big angel fighting this dragon, and you know, there's a little bit of applause and the crowd dispersed, and I took a break, and I'm just sitting there like, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I finished it in 2 days. I never thought, I'm actually at the point in carving where I still don't believe that my carvings are my carvings when they're done. I'm surprised to see them because I don't believe that I can get that out of me. I had originally decided to do a double eagle. It was still a very complicated piece, but I had always wanted to do 2 eagles, 2 bald eagles locked in a battle in midair, and that's what I wanted to do for this carving. I knew that I was going to do the Hackensack Chainsaw Carving Festival months and months before. They contacted me almost a year before the festival, so I had kind of set up to do, you know, and then I had a couple other ideas. I wanted to do something really unique. Well, a couple of months, actually a month before the festival, my life dramatically changed, and I had some incredible hard times happen to me out of nowhere. It just shook me. It was kind of like my whole world was turned upside down on its head. And yeah, and I actually stopped carving. I had just done the Black Duck Woodcarvers Festival, some of the best pieces I've ever done. I did an elk out of driftwood, and I had just finished a rocking horse for my daughter. It was like a year-long project that I had poured my heart into, and I had always wanted to do something like that for my little girl. And suddenly it was like I lost everything, the inspiration to carve. Yeah, I lost everything. And I went through a season about I went through 3 weeks of kind of being incapacitated, and I couldn't go to work. I couldn't really function. I was doing simple daily tasks just to kind of get through what I was going through. And in the back of my mind, I knew that I was coming up on this carving festival, and I almost called and backed out of it because I was just not mentally able to even think about doing that. I didn't have any pieces made. You're supposed to bring pieces with you. I just was not ready. And driving home one day, I saw that piece. I had stood it up in my front yard, the big log, because I was going to try to get the eagle, work on the eagle and bring it down with me. In any case, I saw it standing there, and I saw this piece totally different than I had seen it before, and I saw it as an angel. And it was kind of like this. I've never carved anything other than like a bear, you know, an eagle, driftwood. I mean, you just carve things that fit with where you are. Carving has been a way for me to fill in gaps of money that I don't have, a way to pay a mortgage a month. That, you know, it's really been a godsend in terms of providing extra income when I've desperately needed it. And I've never thought about it as an expression. It is by nature an expression of who you are, but never as an expression of what I was going through. And I saw that, and for me, I knew almost immediately what I wanted. I wanted something that emphatically stated that no matter how bad the situation was that you were going through, no matter how evil the world seemed, no matter how dark the situation, that good always triumphs over evil. And I knew that that's what I wanted that piece to stand for. I didn't want there to be any question in anyone's mind ever that the angel was going to lose and the dragon was going to swallow it. I wasn't going to do it at the festival because it was not a piece I'd ever done before. I wasn't familiar with it. It was not something I wanted to do in front of a crowd. But I got to that weekend, and it was like there was nothing else in me that I could have carved. There's nothing. At that point, I hadn't picked up a chainsaw in over a month and a half. I hadn't even thought about carving. It just wasn't in me. And so when I got there, it was like, nope, if I'm gonna do anything, I'm gonna do this. And this is gonna be a statement for me more than anyone else. And if it's done, then it's done. But when I'm done, I need to know that I'm not gonna give up. And that's what it meant. It was, and no one knew what I was carving there. I think one old lady named Dolores came up to me Sunday as I was finishing the carving, and she asked me what it meant. And no one else at the festival did that. I mean, no one else even knew what it was half the time. And this little old lady, Dolores, was the only one. And I told her very quickly and simply, because we were in a rush, I told her what it was and why I'd carved it. And she gave me this huge hug. She said, I'll be praying for you. And then she wrote me a check for $100 to help me buy it back, which was incredible, because up to that point, I hadn't even conceived of finishing it, let alone taking it with me when I was done. And sure enough, the guy on my left, Joe, said, yeah, you could totally buy your piece back. You know, you only have to pay 25% of the bid. So as soon as I realized that there was an opportunity for me to buy it back, I started, like, my whole thought process changed, and I started thinking about, you know, like numbers and figures. Okay, 25% of what equals the amount in my bank account? And I had a figure of $1,500. If it sold for under $1,500, 25% of that was, I could write a check for that and walk away with it. So we get to the morning, and that's what I had set to do. I was kind of a little nervous because there was like standing room only at the auction, and all of the carvers were seated in the tent watching the crowd. And I wheeled my the angel out there, kind of right in the middle of things, this big piece, and it went up for auction almost immediately. It was the only piece I'd carved, and they go down the row of carvers. And so I wasn't prepared. I hadn't registered. I didn't have an auction number. And suddenly one of the carvers turns to me and says, they're bidding on your piece. At this point, it was already over 1,000. It started at like just under 1,000, 900 and something. And so I, you know, was kind of frantic, like, what do? I throw something at the auctioneer to get his attention, or, you know, stop? I can't stop it. It's already started. And there was a lady who was taking down the details. She was the helper, one of the helpers of the auctioneer, and she quick whipped out a number and said, you can bid using my number, just, you know, please pay it off or my husband will freak out. So I quick grabbed the number and started waving it, but since I was behind the auctioneer, he couldn't hear me, but the crowd saw me, and so they got his attention. And so he turned around and said, oh, and you know, at that point I think it was $1,100. And then it went to $1,125, and then he's working these two guys. One, and I knew both of the guys had their eye on this from early on. One was from Wyoming. He was a professional trap shooter, and the other, I think, had some sort of resort close to Hackensack, and they both wanted it. So he was working both of them, and I'm trying to get in the middle of it. And the second guy, who had the resort, bowed out as soon as I bid, because he saw me bidding on my own piece. But the guy who was from Wyoming didn't realize I was bidding against him. And he told me later, he came up to me later and said, had they not told me it was you, you would have never walked away with that piece, because he had it set, no one was going to outbid him on that piece. And so I had to bid again at $1,150, and then someone elbowed him and basically was like, look, stop, you're bidding against the artist, he wants to take it home. And so he bowed out, and I walked away with my own piece, and there was a smattering of applause, and you know, it was just kind of, and so then it was just that reality of, I just bought this piece, this is mine, I actually can take this home. And in the back of my mind, there had been this thought, where do I want this piece to be? And I wanted it to be somewhere that it wasn't in the rain and out in the weather. I wanted it to be somewhere where it would last for a while, and where the people who needed to take from it what that piece represented could take, you know, could come and see. Not, you know, and I spent a portion of my life in Russia. A lot of things happened there that impacted my later years, and working at orphanages and things like that. And the icon was incredibly important to the Russian people, especially during the communist era. And a lot of people risked their lives to preserve the hand-carved wooden icons in the churches. They risked their lives. Like I talked to people in Russia who had, you know, smuggled and kept and hid away these icons that the communists were destroying. And that concept of having, a craftsman work out something that could be set up and used as an inspiration for others kind of inspired me to donate it to this little church, Mount Zion Church in Nymore, Bemidji, that I had just started attending. People there were incredible. I mean, in one of the hardest times of my life, I met some of the most caring, generous, kind-hearted people I've ever met in my life, which was not a coincidence, but very good. And so I immediately knew that that's what I was going to do with it. I was going to leave it there for as long as it needed to be there, and whoever needed to see it could see it, because I know I'm not the only one that goes through hard times, and I know I'm not the only one who can, be brought to the point of believing that there is no hope. So this was a piece that definitely inspired hope in me, and that's where I wanted it to be for a long time, to inspire that in other people. So.
Thanks so much for watching. Join me again for the next episode of Common Ground. If you have an idea for a Common Ground piece that pertains to North Central Minnesota, email us at legacy@lptv.org or call us 218-333-3022. To view any episode of Common Ground online, visit us at lptv.org. To order individual segments or entire episodes of Common Ground, please call 218-333-3020. Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people on the 4th of November, 2008.